not. So, hey, Patrick. So I'm going to do my thing that Sandra reminded me about. Begin with a story. A portrait of peace. There was once a king who offered a prize to the artist who would paint the best picture of peace. Many artists tried. The king looked at all the pictures, but there were only two he really liked, and he had to choose between them. One picture was of a calm lake. The lake was a perfect mirror, for peaceful, towering mountains were all around it. Overhead was a blue sky with fluffy white clouds. All who saw this thought it was a perfect picture of peace. The other picture had mountains too, but these were rugged and bare. Above was an angry sky from which rain fell and in which lightning played. Down the side of the mountain tumbled a foaming waterfall. This did not look peaceful at all. But when the king looked, he saw behind the waterfall a tiny bush growing in a crack in the rock. In the bush, a mother bird had built her nest. There, in the midst of the rush of angry water, sat the mother bird on their nest. The king chose the second picture. Because, explained the king, peace does not mean to be in a place where there is no noise, trouble, or hard work. Peace means to be in the midst of all those things and still be calm in your heart. That is the real meaning of peace. Okay. So Sandra and I both attended an intercultural conflict resolution training with Beaverton's group. And I think some of you were on that. You want to, who was here, attended that with Barbara Tint? Mike did, and Kimberly did. Okay, so one of the activities that we did there, we thought was really important as a mediation skill. And one of the things that she pointed out, and I think we all know inherently, is that intercultural is really everybody, because Sandra and I, as much as we have lots of synergy planning these things and love each other, as I love all of you, we have differences. So, and we understand things differently, and we have different sorts interpretations and observations and just experiences. So what we're first going to do is Sandra and I are going to model an exercise, and then we are going to take a couple minutes while I figure out the breakout rooms based on the number of people who are here, and have you do the same exercise, two of you together. If there's an odd number, then there'll be three of you. Okay, so here's the exercise. I want you to introduce yourselves. If you don't know each other, you know, you can say just a couple of words of hello. But then the object is to state something that you observe about the other person. And then you'll switch. And then at the end of that, you'll debrief. So Sandra is going to, together we're going to do this exercise, or at least one half of it. And Sandra, we forgot to say who's going to do what. Do you want to observe me?
Either way. I'll observe you.
Okay.
Hello, Kathy. I'm Sandra. Wow, that's a beautiful picture you have behind you.
Thank you. So I want to clarify something I observe about you. is I see a beautiful picture behind you. So you go ahead and use the words, something I observe about you. So, hi, Sandra. Something I observe about you is you have very full curly black hair.
Okay, so now Kathy and I are going to debrief this.
Okay,
Okay.
so, oh, Martin, hi, Victoria. Victoria Johnson, I already said hi to the other Victoria. And it looks like Martin is joining us. What a joy. He probably can't hear me yet, but. So in terms of debriefing this, let me pause for a second. Kimberly and Mike. Where's Mike? There's Mike. Is there anything else you remember from this aspect of the exercise we could do differently or better?
I thought that that it had to be facts that you observed, not
okay,
not
I'm going to pause you there then. That's part of the point. So we're looking at the distinction between observation. What we're going to be looking at is the distinction between observation, interpretation, and evaluation. Some call evaluation judgment, some call observation description. But what we're asking in this first part is to state what you observe about the other person, and also notice internally what happens for you as you look and you're trying to figure out what you want to state, what you observe about the person. So I'll get to where you're going, Kimberly. I want that to be sort of the exploration. Mike, is there anything else that you remember that?
I don't remember. I don't know if I'm repeating Kimberly, but what I remember is the observation is not supposed to happen.
Okay, yeah.
I'll add one thing, Kathy, that we did in that other exercise, in addition to what we observed, we then said what we made that mean.
Oh, we did. Mm-hmm. I forgot that part. Sorry, guys. The baby I was not able to take notes and we didn't get to this level. So let's start over, Sandra.
Okay.
What we're going to ask you to do, and we'll model it this time, I hope. We're going to ask you to go into the breakout rooms, and probably with one person, 3 if there's an odd number, and introduce yourselves if you don't know each other, and then simply state one thing I observe about you, and then what I make that mean. So in this case, I said to Sandra, you have very full, dark, curly black hair. I think that's what I said. And what I make that mean is, all sorts of weird ideas are, you have a genetic pass through for curly hair. That might be what I make it mean. Or I also might mean it probably takes you longer for your hair to dry than for somebody with straight hair. So Sandra, why don't you observe again?
Kathy, what I observe about you is that you have a beautiful painting behind you. And what I make that mean is that you really like art. Okay, so what we're going to do is have you each meet with each other, but in the terms of the debrief, we're looking at observation, interpretation, and evaluation. So I'm not sure whether what I said in the first part, was that an observation or was there an interpretation there? Somebody has some music playing in the background. Okay, so Sandra,
was there anything that you believed was beyond observation in what I said to you in the first part?
I don't believe there was anything beyond observation in what you observed about me.
Okay. So Sandra, when what you observed about me, you include this beautiful painting. Is that an observation or is that an interpretation?
That's me interpreting it, actually that's me evaluating it. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah. So we want each of you to go and practice observing, introducing yourself and observing something about the other person. And then at the end, debrief and see whether you met the observation criteria. You get to have the fun of interpreting it, which I think is, when I did this with somebody the first time or 3 times at that training, nobody, well, we'll talk about that when we come back.
So let me just take a second to clarify. So
Yes, as I'm going to
Kathy-
be creating breakout rooms. We're trying to.
Okay. So in Kathy's example, when Kathy observed something about me, she just observed. When I observed Kathy, I made the mistake of evaluating, which is not part of this, just to show you the difference. So what you're doing is only observing. So I'm so-and-so. What I observe about you is blank. And what I make that mean is blank. And then you switch. Questions about what you're going to do. Okay. And oh, yes, Patrick.
Sorry, is it just one observation?
Right. So each of you gets a turn to do one observation. And then when you both had a turn to observe each other, then you debrief that. Okay. So you can talk about what it was like to only observe, check in. Did you go beyond observing? Those might be some things that you might talk about in your debrief. Questions around what you're doing?
I have a question.
Dennis?
Yeah. When I'm saying what I make it mean, is that sort of to get at my emotions and psychological, what I bring to it? Or am I not even supposed to go there? You know, when I make it mean, am I supposed to try to keep that second section more neutral? Or is that supposed to be more self-disclosing what judgments I bring to it?
Yeah. Yeah. So what goes on for you when you observe this about that person, and what's going on for you internally? What are you making that mean? Questions? Sahar?
Yes, hi. My
Hi.
question is about the interpretation. I'd like to know that what is the meaning of that and what do you mean by that, by interpretation? And is it similar as evaluation compared to observation or not?
So we're going to dive deeper into interpretation and evaluation further on. So at this point, we're asking you to focus on one, observing, and then looking internally and saying, what I make that mean is blank. And just going that far at this point. So think of it as you're taking steps. And this is the first step. Sahar, is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions before you go to breakout rooms? So who can repeat back what you're going to do in the breakout rooms?
Isn't she brilliant? That was an evaluation. Even though I think it's truth.
I can try.
Thank you.
Each pair of individuals will take turns introducing themselves and then making an observation about the other person and saying what that observation means to the observer. And after each person has done that, we'll debrief with each other.
Yes, correct. Yes. Okay. Kathy, are you ready with the breakout rooms?
I'm ready with a couple of comments. There is one with 3, and I was just picking the first 2 people along. So there's one that has 2 with the same name. Sorry. The other is, I'm wondering, you can come back when you're done. I think we'll give you, if this asks me, it hasn't asked me how much time, 7 minutes. You think that'll be long enough? And if it's too long, just come back, because we're going to debrief as a group too. And we'll dive into more of what you each have been asking about, and then how this applies to mediation. Okay, so if it doesn't bring you back after 7 minutes, somebody, if you're done after 5, just come back. And we'll see how, I apologize. I've not used breakout rooms for quite a while, and I think Sandra did them last time. So, but I forgot to have her open the meeting. So here we go. Open all rooms. So is it asking you to join? Yes. Was Anthony in here in 2 ways? Because I'm pretty sure I assigned him to a room.
I don't know. Oh, there he
Oh,
goes.
there he went. Okay.
See, look at you. Nice job, Kathy.
Oh, I'm not feeling good so far about this, except for your bringing in things, but it's okay. We don't have to be perfect.
I think it's going just fine.
Okay, so what's our next? Let me time, because it did not ask for.
So it's 1:48 right now. You gave him 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So that would be 1:56. 1:55, 7 minutes. They'll be back.
I started a beeper. I think we'll broadcast a message to all in 6 minutes.
Okay.
That they have 1 minute to finish up.
Okay.
So when we come back, I'm really glad you're here today. Usually I feel like I have more mastery over what we're doing. And today I fell back asleep for an hour and a half this morning, and I'm just not together, but oh well. It was an illusion that I ever was.
Kathy, you have had so much on your plate. And like I said in my email, I am just so impressed with all that you do and how well you do it.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so when they come back,
So I've got a couple of questions I'm going to add to it. Since we added the piece about what I make that mean. So a couple of things. When they're observing, so thinking about wanting to ask the question around, I'm thinking of a closed question and I'm trying to make this open-ended.
you're so great.
I'm looking at like limits. So if you're looking at yourself internally, what limits did you put on yourself when you were observing folks?
Yes.
Especially for purposes of this activity.
Yes.
So not wanting to go here, not wanting to go there. So I'll talk about the picture on the wall or something safe. And then also, what was surprising about what you made your observation mean? What was surprising to you? And what was surprising to the other party, to who you were making the observation about?
Yeah, like it's hilarious. Many people have said that thing about art. I am so not into art.
Right.
And I guess this is one for, as it relates to mediation, it's like we can spin out, we do. We spin out all these stories when we interpret and evaluate. Like, what's the distinction? Here's some early birds.
Oh, you want us to leave again?
No, you can hang out. We're just prepping for what we're doing next. So you can be part of that. We have some questions to ask everybody. And
I think you were starting to say something, Kathy.
well, I guess what I am aware of is, to me, an observation is what a video camera can record. An interpretation, it's a fine line between interpretation and evaluation. Interpretation, it's what I make it mean, and it might have an evaluative component. I might make it a positive or a negative, but I might just make it neutral. Like, I'm thinking of some examples, but I don't want to repeat when other folks come back. So we could just say, because not everybody's going to have a chance to talk, to share. I'm thinking if we want to keep things going. Patrick, you were not part of the intercultural training before, were you? So what was this like for you?
Well, it was, when going into it, I thought it might be harder to keep things neutral. And when I saw Kimberly's, shirt, I just observed the shirt, and it was interesting. I think that maybe where we're going, but I was wondering about this is, and I wish I'd asked Kimberly, I wish I'd asked you this before. When you're doing your interpretation, you put your own judgments into the interpretation or into the observation. And so I wish that I had asked you, Kimberly, when you were talking about my watch, whether time of, because you mentioned that you thought maybe time was of the essence, was important to me. I'm wondering if it's something that's important to you.
That's a great question. It is, right? Yeah, for me, I was raised that you have to be on time. It's very rude to not be. And so I'm always watching the time. So yeah, it is. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, for sure. That's what probably what played into my keying in on your watch.
Yeah. Yeah, Kimberly gave a much more interesting interpretation than I did for her mouse.
Well, that's one of the things I find interesting in these. I just figured out I can close all the rooms. I've given everybody a 1-minute notice, just so those of you who have rejoined us, they have 1 more minute for the 7 minutes. And except I forgot to set the 1-minute timer, and then I can close rooms. But my experience with Zoom is it may take them up to 60 seconds to come back. So we'll just continue our mini discussion. So thanks, Patrick. Anyone else want to comment until people do come back about what the experience was like for you?
I got caught up with Sahar, so that was pleasant.
You mean you didn't do the experiment?
We did the
exercise
experiment, but yeah, she's in Cleveland now. So
Or
And
just for the
Huh?
permanently or just for now?
I think permanently. Her husband is doing neurology at Case Western. So
Oh,
so my guess is she has left us. So we got caught up on some stuff, which was fun.
but she's still going to mediate from online.
Yes,
So,
I absolutely believe she'll do that. Yeah. So she's such a
Yeah.
nice person.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Oh, Sahar's there. I said,
okay, I didn't really look to see how many of us there were to start. I think not everyone is back, but I closed the rooms. So I'm going to let Sandra start some of the questions and we'll fill in as seems appropriate.
Okay, welcome back. So who'd like to share some things that came up in your room when you're debrief? What are some things that came up in your debrief? Mike?
yeah, I can start. I think Sahar and I had a discussion about whether the meaning of what we observed could or should be evaluative. And I think we came down on the side that it probably is going to be evaluative in some way. So that was a kind of an interesting discussion. I don't know how I would avoid it not being evaluative in some way.
Okay, yeah. So thinking about what you're thinking in your mind, your interpretation, and is that an evaluation, and kind of figuring those pieces out.
Yep.
How about for others? What's something that came up in your debrief?
I would say for us, both of us found that each of our observations were very accurate in what was our intention. Sort of I for example thought that he felt comfortable in this setting, and he agreed, and he had observed that I had created an open space that was light, and that was what I had crafted. So I think the accuracy of each of our observations.
Great. So the accuracy. Elaine,
So could I ask a follow-up question first, please, Sandra?
Sure.
So who were you paired with?
Chuck.
So what was your actual observation? Because this is what we're trying to look at in terms of mediator skills. What observation did you state to Chuck?
So that I stated to Chuck, I said I observed that he was wearing a t-shirt, which told me that he was very comfortable with these trainings and his setting, and with the mediation program and Kathy, and some of his other introductions, some of the things that he said. But it was just, and that it was probably warm where he was, and comfort was important to him. And he agreed. He said,
so fantastic. And what's the observation part of your statement?
That he was wearing a green t-shirt or a t-shirt.
Okay. All right. I just want to tease out the observation versus all that follows for us. And it's brain's work. So, and Chuck, what did you observe about Brenna?
The lightness of the space in which she has chosen to place herself, and the one perfectly placed green plant, it projected for me a certain professionalism, not crisp, not meaning that, but it was an ordered professionalism, which actually between the two of us, I think was funny, because my situation, I'm sort of like, oh yeah, whatever, but she's at work, and it's professional, it's clean, it's straightforward, it's not brittle crisp, but it's businesslike.
So who's getting some distinctions here? between what's the observation, just the observation, and then the stories we tell ourselves about observing. Because even that one perfect plant, which we can only see a tiny bit of right now, Brennan. Okay, back to Sandra.
So let me check in. Elaine, you had your hand up.
Well, Anthony and I were in the same room, and because we have years of overlap, it's challenging to come up with an observation out of context. In other words, for me, there's a whole context, and saying one thing and then what do I make meaning of is informed by that history. And of course, in real life, one needs to leave an opening, so that's not all you see in the first look. So
Yeah, so that difference between when you make an observation with someone that you don't know at all versus when you make an observation with someone that you do know or have known for quite a while. Yeah.
yes.
So let's everybody make a mental note of that, because this is, I think, what was interesting to me about the training is if I'm making an observation, is it okay to go into the distinction a little bit now, Sandra?
Sure. Yeah.
An observation to me, hey, Sephora.
Hi.
What would a video camera record? It's nothing, there's none of the interpretation. There's none of the meaning making. There's simply, right now on my Zoom screen, I see black border and several, I'd have to count them to see how many different frames. I think there's 20. Right now, my frame is bordered by yellow. The rest of you don't have yellow. If I shut up, I know. No, that gets into interpretation and evaluation. Each of you have different things in the background of your frames. I can see all of your faces and some a little bit more of your torsos. Those are things a video camera could record, yes? And we would all probably agree with the accuracy, quote, the accuracy of your interpretation is quite different from what I'm talking about here. So I just want to bring that out as you listen to what people are talking about, because I think that it's really critical in terms of what we're doing when we mediate.
Other groups want to share something that came up in your debrief? Kathy?
So Dennis and I were in the same room, and we discovered that we each gave more depth to our interpretation than was warranted. So I observed that Dennis had this kind of shoji-like screen behind him, and I went toward, thinking about Japan and aesthetics and all. And he said, no, it's just the cheapest thing I could find to hide my clutter. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's.
Yeah. And where I went was, well, I wanted to make my personal side comment on her hairstyle, and being what I would call relatively short, but sort of upward and not neatly cropped. And where I went with that was sort of a blend between professionalism and being sort of trying to be sort of playful or funkier, And that came from my history of dealing with both artists and attorneys. The artists I know and the musicians have long hair that's a little bit unruly, and my daughters want mine to grow a bit longer. And all my attorney friends are like me, well, sort of close to cut. So it was interesting. And for her, it was more functional. It wasn't a matter of attributing personality stuff to it. It was just a more functional style. And so I thought that was very insightful.
Yeah, so each of you gave it much more meaning than what it actually had for either one of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which raises an interesting point that I was thinking about is, it's, I know we're talking about like things in the room or dress and stuff, but when we get into things like facial features and body posture, and you see, even my daughter is an artist, so she'll do something like somebody with a surprised face, or somebody with a sad face or perplexed face, and there's all these facial mannerisms too. And if we were to just describe the facial mannerisms, we might say, well, their eyebrows are raised or their mouth is open or something. But I'm wondering how accurate our interpretations are, even of those facial signs, which we automatically take for granted and seem to use in social interactions every day. Well, that's one thing that came up in my mind. I mean, how far does one dissect or look at what one's bringing to the equation? Can one,
Right, right. So when you think about a mediation, for example, and all of the things that you may be observing of each of the parties, and all of their body language, which can be a lot, and you're interpreting each one, giving it a meaning, and how close or far off are you? Yeah. So I'm curious, for purposes of this activity, how many of you found yourself maybe limiting what you were going to observe? Maybe putting limitations on yourself of what you're going to say out loud that you're observing. Anthony?
And Patrick and Lindsay, so one of you want to comment on it?
Yes.
Go ahead, Anthony. I think you were getting yourself off mute.
You said, did anybody limit themselves? And my answer is yes, I did. To elaborate on that, I had thought, in order to be true to the exercise, because I know Elaine and we've had lots of interactions in the past, I wanted to be true to the exercise and only note actual factual observations. So I decided to limit myself to only one and not all of the things that I observed. And so I just shared the first thing that I observed.
Okay,
and I left it at that. Okay.
Thank you. I think Lindsay and Patrick, each of you raised your hand. How about for you? Want to elaborate on the limitations you put on yourself?
Yeah, I couldn't help but jump forward in the exercise and think about the story, because I find it difficult for me to extrapolate from observation to interpretation. So I was like, I observed a lot of things, but I'm like, but which of these things can I make up a story about?
Yeah.
Which yeah.
So wanting to be prepared and looking forward to step 2 to help inform step 1.
I know it's not ideal, but that's what I did.
Patrick, you had your hand raised as well?
Yeah, my approach was, I tend to be a cautious person. So I think that I would focus on something that I knew or believed, I suppose should be the word, wouldn't offend somebody in my interpretation. And so, when I was thinking about going into it, before we went into the room, I was thinking, okay, I don't want to, overstep and, step into something that makes somebody feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were being mindful of how the other person might feel before choosing what you were going to observe.
That's so interesting, Patrick, because I probably did the exact opposite. I was thinking about observing the background and the wall decor and everything, but I figured it'd be more fun to write for something like hairstyle and stuff and see, because I did think about sort of toning down my observations, whether or not to make it personal or not, and I probably just went the opposite direction.
I've done variations of this exercise a few times. Barbara Tint was one of my professors in university, and my observation about this exercise is that many people tend to get as far away from something personalized as they can when making their observations. So like backgrounds or clothing. And people are really reluctant to talk about personal, like the very personal attributes of like your face or your whatever. And the story I have about that is that it's very uncomfortable for people to say out loud what they're thinking about the people that are in front of them.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting.
Yeah, so kind of filtering that.
And yet, Lindsay, I think some of those observations are the most powerful in the way that we address someone. That's a very interesting insight. It's under the surface, but man, it's big.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from some of the reports back is how some of you, when you shared your story, not the observation, but the story about what that observation meant to you, you found that to be true. The other person said yes. Some of you found that not to be true. And so as we're looking into a mediation and we're noticing things, some that we're willing to comment on, maybe we don't need to comment on any of them, but to be aware that those stories and those observations are coming in, what are we doing with them? If we really believe they're true, how does that influence the way we go forward in the mediation? And what can we do to question them or be more mindful and therefore take perhaps a different path? So what, Sandra, I think I'm sort of following your lead, and I also have one of the next questions comes to mind. But
Go ahead then.
Well, no, you go ahead if you have anything else to follow up on here.
I was just going to ask folks, what do you think, given what Kathy just asked? So given that you are observing things in mediation, you're making them mean something. How do you check in? How do you check in on those things that you're making it mean? Victoria?
Yeah, it was, ours was interesting because Yvonne did a great observation, and then it was interesting to hear her story about it. And then I started thinking, well, what if she had made the observation? I mean, obviously that we weren't doing this exercise. And she said, oh, I noticed this. I'm wondering what you think that says about you. And then I was thinking, what would I say? And it would be kind of different. But I just thought how wonderful it would be if, we were able, especially in a mediation, I'm observing this. Can you tell me what this is meaning? And I also was remembering, but our initial interpretation can really stick, I think. And probably all of us have done those activities where you're given a quality that you don't see, but you put it on your forehead and other people see it. And then they treat you according to that quality. And I remember doing that one time. And I'm sorry to say this, but even after the activity was over, it wasn't a nice quality. Even after that activity was over, when I would look at this person, that's what came in my mind. And so it just reinforced how we really have to be careful to not take our initial story as accurate. And we might really learn so much if we ask, well, I'm seeing that you're doing this. Can you tell me what's going on for you or what it means to you? How important that is.
Yeah, so I'm hearing two things, Victoria. I'm hearing one, ask the person. So I'm seeing that you teared up when so-and-so said this. You know, how did that land for you? What's going on? What's got you to tear up? So there's the piece of checking in, because you may be making that mean something, and instead you're now asking the person, what did it mean for you? The other piece of it is you're still making it mean something for you before you ask that question, and being mindful that you are taking in what they're telling you it means for them, and now being mindful to change it in your own head to what it meant for them. Yeah. Mike?
I think to kind of take it one step further, I know there are times when just by the initial interaction with one party or another, I create or form an opinion of what that person is, what their background is, what their personality is. And at least a couple of times I've been able to check that, to realize, okay, that's your opinion. It may or may not be true. A couple of times I haven't. Okay. Because it's, whatever that characteristic is so ingrained. But when I've caught myself with that, what I've tried to do is be absolutely transparent with both parties appropriately transparent with both parties about that, or with the other, certainly with the other party about that. And, specifically, I was mediating a case, young woman, and I honestly felt sorry for her. Okay. Went to the other party, was in private session, went to the other party and said, look, I want you to understand that young woman could be my daughter or my granddaughter. And I hope that doesn't affect my objectivity or my neutrality. But if it does, then, you certainly have the right to tell me that is affecting me. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how else to deal with that, because you're just gonna run into people that touch your buttons.
Yeah, so I'm hearing you caught yourself in the moment in that situation that you're talking about, and you were transparent with the other party, gave them the opportunity that, hey, if they see you as not being impartial, they can ask for another mediator. I'm also hearing, while you said there have been times where you didn't catch yourself, clearly upon reflection, you noticed it. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, I had unmute myself. Yeah, because you think about, or at least I think about what I've done when I had I think about what I've done sometimes for a week or two after I've mediated, because it's important to people.
Yeah. And so one other thing comes up for me as you're describing this. So kind of that line between interpreting about someone, making assumptions about someone, and the impartiality because they are familiar to you. And so while it sounds like for you, this person could be, you said your daughter or your granddaughter. And what was it that got you to thinking that?
Her age, her vulnerability, the circumstances that had put her in the position she was in.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it was the familiarity piece there that connected it to, or that person to your daughter, your granddaughter. Or
more to, in my case, and I'm sorry if I'm occupying everybody's time, my apologies, but more to how I would feel about any young person that's having a rough time and trying to do the right thing.
Mhm. Yeah. How about for others?
So what are some things that you
Observe in mediation that you typically come to a judgment or an evaluation, an interpretation, and how do you handle those? So again, the reason we're trying to distinguish between observation, what a video camera would record, and all of us would agree. Right now, behind Kimberly's head, I see a plant. I don't know if it's real or what kind it is, but I see a plant. Would you all agree there's a plant back there? Now I can make up a story about that plant and why it's there. That's the place where, as I'm mediating, I try to start questioning my own thoughts and bringing it back to this idea for me. Behind all of this for me is self-determination. I want this to be the parties' mediation and them to have the opportunity to talk about what's important to them and to come up with their own solution. If I have all these stories filtering through my mind that I'm not questioning, and some of them we can't help, but if I start to question it, then how can I refocus on what is reality for them or what is their own sense of what's important? So as an example, if I see somebody in mediation doing, it's harder to like, what stories do each of you make up about that body language that I just tried to display?
It looked like I observed that you were looking around. I interpreted it as something going on in the room. You were agitated about something, and either you were uncomfortable with what was going on, what was being presented to you, or you wanted to get away and were looking for a way out. Or there was something going on off camera.
You're not here. You're not here. Your head's not where we are.
And how, so thank you, Patrick. At the beginning, you gave video camera language. I'm looking around, etc. And then you shared the story you're making up about that. And Chuck, then you made a very firm judge, and I'm going to use evaluation. I'm mixing up the evaluation and judgment. I think they're similar or maybe the same, but judgment has more negative implications for me. So I'm trying to stay away from it. There's no real good reason for that. But when you get to the point of you're not here, what's something you can do as a mediator that might open this mediation up rather than sticking with your internal assessment? You're not here.
That was what I would call a Gladwell blink. It was a Gladwell blink. You got to slow it down if your mind is taking you there.
Check in.
That's a question. What's something that you might do in the mediation?
Check in.
Happening.
Yeah, ask them how they're feeling. I'm noticing, you know, I'm just wanting to check in with you, Kathy, to see how are you doing in this mediation right now? Are you feeling comfortable? Is there something you want to chat about? mean, I think I'd probably check in just to see if I could figure out what it was. They may have restless leg syndrome for all I know, right? Or can't sit still. They have a bad back. And I move all the time and it's because of those things. And so I would ask somebody, what, is there something going on?
Yeah, so I think one strategy is to make a comment about the observation, which helps them understand why you're asking this out of the blue. Because, I'm doing this to just create a conversation here. At the same time, I just had 16 ounces of tea. I really just need to go to the restroom. But if you can say, hey, I'm noticing that you're shifting in your chair a lot, and I'm just wanting to check in with you. Is there something going on that you might need or that you want to share? Or rather than bringing my story to it and staying there, oh, this would be a great time for a break. Could I have a 2-minute break to go use the restroom? And that might be all it is. Which it's very close to break time, but.
Can I share a couple close cousins to that I think
yes,
about?
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
something that I think can get misinterpreted is lack of eye contact. If somebody's not making eye contact with the mediator or the other party, I think that can be interpreted sometimes as guilt or shame or disengagement. And it might be those things. It might also be some people just have a hard time making eye contact. Some people who are on the autism spectrum or with ADHD, things like that, just neurodivergent differences. Also, like fidgetiness, kind of a similar situation there. You could interpret that somebody's tapping a pencil on the table. That could be interpreted as impatience. Or it could be stimming, which is another thing that neurodivergent folks can do to release energy.
Yeah, I was in New Zealand years ago on the eye contact thing. So it can just be a cultural shift. It may not have to do with neurodivergence in this culture, but it may. And I was reading this and I went into a grocery store and I was just bound and determined to be cheery and say hello and make personal contact with the clerk. And she was not Maori, but I watched her with the person before me and I thought she's having not such a great day. And I go up and I try to make eye contact with her. And it was not all that, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't all that successful. The next day I read in this book about the New Zealand, I've forgotten the word, the European New Zealanders. They said when they encounter Americans typically want this unrelenting eye contact. And it's similar to the Maori towards the European New Zealand population. They like less eye contact too. So it was just really a big aha. Oh, she wasn't having a bad day. She wasn't unfriendly. I was outside her comfort zone and vice versa. So to check those assumptions. Mike.
Yeah, I lived in the Appalachians for a number of years, and there, if you were having a serious discussion with one of the people who lived there, you avoided eye contact like crazy. It just was culturally, because if you made eye contact, you weren't trying to solve a problem, you were being aggressive.
So just one of the things that occurs to me as we're talking about this, some of these behaviors that we're observing, it might be okay to address them in joint meeting, and it may be more appropriate to go to a private meeting to check it out with the person. So, anybody else, any comments? Because our next stop is a break, but
I want to wrap up anything, or Sandra, do you have any?
No.
Okay, so how about we say a 10-minute break? And we'll have, does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, we'll see you back here. Actually, it's 9 minutes at 2:40. That'll give us 50 minutes.
and what they see, there's a lot of stuff that's connected that we can't know that.
Right, right. So that's where I think we are challenged more, is when we hear something and we interpret, and then we check back with the parties, is the scale of how do we do it without insulting anybody, or without bringing up stuff that they're not ready to engage in. I mean, it's a lot more delicate if we are addressing, you know, a statement or, you know, something verbal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it even gets into even more interesting issues, because verbal can be intonations and inflection, or it can also be the symbolic meaning of words. It comes to mind. I come from a family that's from Slovenia, which is right there on the Austrian border near Italy, and used to be Yugoslavia. And when all our relatives get together, it sounds like we're all fighting.
Yes,
I mean,
I know
just the energy level is really high. I know a guy from Tasso who's a good friend, is a roommate, and when he'd have his backgammon groups, you know, they were just having a good time, and it sounded like the house was coming down.
Yes.
And they were yelling and shouting at each other. And other people, like from proper English descent and stuff, a raised eyebrow can be an expression of anger. And so I always find it fascinating how culturally and socially and just experientially people bring even the decibel level and the energy to a room, different associations with it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, because I grew up in a very similar culture where we just yelled and screamed at each other, and it didn't mean as much as here. It would be, everybody would take it as a personal insult, where we just throw things around, nobody takes each other seriously. So you're right, you know, we need to be a little bit, how do we educate ourselves if we have to deal with somebody from Slovenia or an Israeli couple in the room, right? Where is Pat? I wonder how much you have experience with that one.
So what do you do with that? How is that any different than noticing visuals that we've been talking about? But in my mind, thank you so much for bringing up Sephora. It's in my mind that a video camera's recording words. So I might say, well, I'm noticing that your voice has gotten louder, or you just said this word, and can you tell me what that means to you? Am I correct in interpreting it this way? For me, it's that going back, and sometimes, like talking before, it feels okay to check it out when both parties are there, and sometimes I think I need to go into a private meeting to check it out. Because you spoke, Sephora, about, is it safe to address these issues at certain times with people?
Kathy, or based upon, again, what Sephora and Dennis were saying, you know, if you're doing a mediation and you, as I am, one of those people that, you know, raise voice, emotion kind of causes me to cringe a little bit, but both parties are of the, let's just say, Israeli descent and can yell and scream at each other, but it's not personal. But you feel it's personal, you know, as the mediator. Are you still able to let the two parties take the lead, and assuming there's no harm being done to either one, let it go? That's tough.
Yes. Can we build our flexibility to go where the parties need to go, as opposed to our own comfort zone? And if we can't, what do we do then? I mean, sometimes some of us are not yet at that stage. So
I'm usually for transparency. So I don't have a problem in mediation saying, like, you know, I'm listening to you and just observing. I could be wrong, but it seems like you're fairly comfortable in this conversation you are having right now. I just want to say, I'm not that comfortable, but if you are, I just want to hear from you, educate me on it. So I'm on for transparency. I'm people really like to educate other people of their, their styles, and if they're from a different culture. So I just transparently I'll say how I feel or what I observe and let them educate me. I've done that in the past. Or I had a Japanese guy recently from Japan who mediated with an American guy, and he just told him, I have a hard time expressing myself in conflict. It's not something it comes easy for me. So I just want to say it. And I think when the mediator sometimes is transparent, then it allows the party to be transparent also. There's lots of education that can happen in a mediation.
Yeah, it sounds like having the mediator modeling that transparency is helpful to the parties, so then they can feel comfortable to be more transparent.
I actually had a case, and then I'll shut up because I don't want to take the time. It's not my training, but I had a case in small claims where a guy from Egypt, I think, was in there with an American guy, and the guy from Egypt wore lots of gold jewelry, and the American guy said to the Egyptian guy, like, "Don't tell me you don't have any money to pay me back. Look at you." It's like. So that was a little bit of a moment of education there where, one blames the other for what he observes, right? Is to I invited the guy from Egypt at the time to just talk about, do you want to share, about the statement that Mr. John is saying about the jewelry you're wearing? Do you want to talk about it? So just kind of invite it as into the room and see what comes out.
I think transparency is wonderful. One is able to do it and remember to do it. Mike, I go back to Kathy's story at the beginning and what Pat said about how sometimes he might be thrown off. I've gotten thrown off before and can't stay in a state of inner peace because the conflict in the room has gone to a level where my insides are churning a little bit more than they should, for whatever reason, whether it's rightly or wrongly. So I guess my question was, observations sort of require that sort of calm, detached state. Going back to your story, Kathy, what are things the mediator could do internally to get back into that calm observational state if they find themselves triggered by two Slovenes or Israelis or something? You guys know any techniques that would allow one to get into that observational state in addition to transparency and checking in with the party?
I think that's part of why we're having this conversation, that to the degree we realize we can distinguish observation from interpretation and evaluation. So you observe the voices in the room are louder than what you normally hear. If it was real observation, you might have a decibel level. And at this decibel level, I'm comfortable. Up here, I'm not so comfortable. I'm just observing that. What's the meaning? The comfort and is the interpretation and the evaluation. So for me, when I remember to go back to observation, okay, they're talking in louder tones of voices than I'm comfortable with. That's an observation of my own internal state. So I can check in with them, as Sephora suggested. I'm a little uncomfortable with this. How is this for you? Oh, you're uncomfortable? Okay, it's your mediation.
can I, as a mediator, stay with it? It helps me to realize I don't need to go into evaluation. There's nothing wrong with the way they're doing it. It's just different than I'm used to. And so, alternatively, if I can't get to that space, take a break. You may have to excuse yourself as the mediator if this is an ongoing thing that's, so those are some of what are some self-soothing things that we each know how to do. I really try and bring those to consciousness before I mediate. And unless I'm just at this super chill place and I feel like I can deal with anything. How about somebody else? What are your strategies to deal with? And so Pat.
I'm not sure I have a strategy, but I do have a story just to share with you, because you know what I think we're talking about, you know, I think it goes well beyond culture. You know, whatever culture you have come from, you may have had some experiences that have formed and shaped, you know, how you react as a mediator. And I will share one with you, and that is very early, you know, in the mediation training way back when I was taking, one of the concepts that I learned was, you know, go to the heat, you know, let the two parties, you know, start to go at it, because that's what brings out what's really important to them. And for some reason, you know, I thought, wow, I'm gonna try that one out. And one of my early mediations at the courthouse, it was a highly emotional one, and it kept escalating, and it got out of control. It got way out of control, and I lost control of it. And I still think back on that as a formative experience that I had that still sticks with me, that I never want to have a mediation that I let go that far. So I probably still, I pull it in probably quicker maybe sometimes than I should, but that experience still sticks with me. And it's something I have thought a lot about, and I try to, you know, loosen the grip it has on me a little bit, but just something I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, those early formative experiences can linger with us unless, if we want to sort of deprogram them. I mean, some strategies for that I've seen in NVC training is to have a trainer or a party blast at you with the goal of you beginning to be able to regulate in the face of that. Yeah. So again, I'm having this big banner in the back of my mind about self-determination. This is not my mediation. I'm here to try and help these parties get what works for them. And, you know, if we were out in private practice and having a series of mediations with a couple, say, I might decide I'm really not the good match for them. Unfortunately, in small claims, you're thrown in, and knocking wood right now, I've never had a mediator come back and say, I can't deal with this, give it to somebody else. But that is an option. So, so I'm wondering, is this conversation useful to you all?
Yeah.
I feel very personally off track today. And yet I really think this is important. The questions you're talking about, Pat, those early experiences, and you're asking Dennis about how do I deal and support as well. When you hear these words or this tone that's set, what do we do? And for some reason, this idea of stopping my stories, or I can't stop them, but I can question their reality, is the most useful thing to me. Victoria Johnson, you wanted to say something, I think.
Thank you, Kathy. So Pat's story, Sephора's question, it brings to mind an experience I had a couple of months ago, which you and I debriefed over, where one of the parties, the plaintiff, used very foul language in a personal attack method toward the defendant. And it took me by surprise. The strategy was to stop it immediately, go into breakout group. And in terms of the observation, the first observation is clearly this individual, well, I guess that's an evaluation. The observation is foul language was used and it's not appropriate. Well, that's still an evaluation. Foul language was used in mediation. Everything else from there is the evaluation, which is not appropriate and it needs to stop. But part of that evaluation was, okay, she's clearly upset, but here she came back and she did it again a second time. So I heard Pat say that you felt like a failure. I had a serious dose of that. It very much impacted the other party, and from there we went back to we went to shuttle mediation. That I in order to finish up, and we did reach agreement that I would not allow the two individuals to be in the same room again. One of the things that it brought to mind that I hope is useful for this conversation is that there came a point in the evaluation process where I realized that the person using the foul language was not like me. In other words, I would never behave that way. And then, so this is, to me, it's yet a deeper level of self-questioning and self-awareness, which is, does that then interfere with my ability to do right by both parties as a mediator when I'm clearly struggling with the behavior of the one party. So that's what I wanted to share, was that about that extra level of when the mediator, so there's the first step, you make the observation. The second step is you evaluate, or you interpret and you evaluate. And then for me, there's a sub level of evaluation when you get to, and I would never do this. And therefore it sets you a little bit at odds with your parties. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
I want anyone to comment on that. I just want to say, Victoria, this is a case I meant to come back to you, because what we talked about afterwards, I thought for days, and I thought I didn't like what I said to you then, but let's do that later offline.
One of the reasons that I think this conversation is important is that the idea that I think it's important to be mindful about when we use evaluative statements in our language in mediation and outside of mediation, because it really can change the tone and the relationship of a conversation. There's an example from my life. There's a family member who, whenever I see this person, they have really evaluative things to say about me. I immediately feel appraised. And they're usually all positive. It's usually like, wow, that shirt looks great on you. Looks like you've lost weight. Your hair's looking really good today. But it still puts me in this frame of mind like I'm being evaluated, and it's not actually helpful for our relationship. And so I try to be really mindful about when I'm using evaluative language at all times, and use it really intentionally if I'm going to be evaluative, even if it's in a positive way. And I think that is especially true in a place like mediation, where roles are really defined and what you're there to do is very, very specific.
I also had once two neighbors, and when I was working in Beaverton, that were using really strong language with each other. And I just made the observation right in front of both of them and asked them if they find this exchange useful, or do they see themselves actually getting through to a conversation that's going to help them out. So sometimes just kind of making the observation right there catches people like, what did she just say? Kind of catches them and breaks through, rather than, one of the ways is to separate them. I'm all for it. But sometimes I am actually I like to experiment with what happens in the room when you raise it, when you raise your observation and ask them to explain it or to kind of reflect on it right there in front of you. And that really broke through. So the transparency part is really where I'm more and more comfortable with. And I like to, because it's like going to the heat. Who talked about going to the heat? Chuck? Yeah, I really like going, yeah, just go to the heat by just making an observation, be transparent and see what happens, because it can help them break through their, unuseful conversation. And it's a good tool for them and it's good skill building for them. And they can transform the conversation and make peace with each other because of that moment.
Kimberly?
I was just going to say that that makes really good sense to me. I think Sephora is a master at sort of raising issues without judgment. Like, she's phenomenal at doing that. I think that's the difficult part here, is that we're in a situation where we may have our own inner dialogue going on with some observations or some interpretations, and the key is going to be checking those, so that if you're going to confront somebody or bring it out at that moment, that you've checked those, so that that bias or whatever is not part of the statement, that you're when you're saying, gosh, I noticed that both of you are raising your voices. Can I ask how you're feeling about that? And do you feel that that's going to help us come to resolution? That you aren't saying that with any attitude, if that makes sense. That would probably, I think, to me, be the most challenging, is to remove some of that "this isn't helpful" kind of thoughts that I'm having, like Victoria is saying, that's not acceptable, that's inappropriate. But you got to remove that from, if you're going to actually call them on it and ask them about their behavior, to do that without judgment. And I think sometimes that's challenging. I wish sometimes that I could just sit and watch Sephora for days and days and days, just so that I could learn and soak up how she phrases things, because I think she's phenomenal. I was lucky enough to take a class from her, and I'm trying to emulate her style, because I think that's such a good way of not being confrontational, but still bringing the issue out in the open.
One thing that occurs to me as I think about this is that when sometimes I reflect back to parties, and I probably add a little bit to, because not everyone is articulate, or I don't catch everything. And so sometimes I've had people say, no, that's not what I mean. And they go on to explain it. That might be a technique that could be used to explore an observation.
So reflecting back an observation to check in if you're interpreting it accurately, is that?
Right, there is a bit of interpretation there, but with a question.
Mm-hmm.
Did I understand, or do I understand what you're saying or expressing? Yeah.
So with that, what's the difference between an interpretation, an assumption, and an evaluation? What's the difference? Interpretation, assumption, evaluation.
Haven't looked them up, but I'll give it a go. The evaluation, in my perspective, has the most amount of judgment embedded in it. Interpretation seems to me to be a more neutral yes, we bring our own experiences to it, but it's a step shy, in my view, of judging and assuming. I think sometimes it happens so quickly and subconsciously that we may not even be aware of it. So there, that's.
Yeah.
Seems to me that the essence of assumption is that you're bringing a lot of information that's not actually in the room. From wherever you're bringing it from, it might be your own experience or whatever, but you're adding a bunch of stuff in there that's not there.
And for
Right,
the
so-
assumption, sorry, yes, for the assumption,
go ahead.
it gives me the feeling that when we say that they assume like that we are not completely certain or judging in the judgment level. It's a kind of shaky level, which makes it better, better phase.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, the interpretation is taking what you've observed and making it mean something. Assumption is taking it another step to where you're bringing things in that aren't even in the room. Is that what folks are thinking? And then what happens when you evaluate?
You overlay a moral judgment on top of it in terms of good or bad. So like along the good bad continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to point out something I heard you say or highlight, Lindsay. You talking about the evaluation, even when it's positive, does not land well for you. Did I get that more or less?
It's not that it
Please
doesn't.
elaborate.
It does not that it doesn't land well necessarily, but it changes the tone of the conversation. It reframes the conversation into, oh, now we're talking about whether I'm good or bad, and you're clearly thinking about whether I'm good or bad. It just it changes the tenor of the interaction from like a more, I don't know.
It feels like judgment is more of an end point, whereas at least some of these other steps or these other stages, as Victoria's describing it, there's a chance that your thinking could take a different path, but a judgment is sort of like, boom, there's that fixed point from which other things will flow. I think maybe that's what's so important about it, because it freezes a bunch of stuff that maybe shouldn't be frozen yet.
That's interesting, that freezing it step.
Well, there was somewhere I heard the idea that the definition of bias is when you don't need to ask any more questions. And that's where I was going with that. Judgment is sort of a fully realized bias. I don't need to ask anything more. I know all I need to know. Judgment, settled.
Well, Sandra, go for your next. I want to bring the baby story in somewhere, and I'm not sure if now is the right place.
Yes, now is great.
So most of you know I've been caretaking my granddaughter a lot lately with help, because one-handed diaper changes are sometimes doable and sometimes not. Carrying her downstairs, never doable. But I was thinking about this workshop or whatever we're calling it today, and the idea of observation. The baby is 9 months old. She has no language yet. She's playing, and all of a sudden she just starts crying. I mean, like screaming and tears running down her face. I'm trying to interpret, what does she want? And when I first watched her, I thought she wants her dad. She doesn't know me yet well enough, and she needs her dad. And usually, so I'd call her dad would come in and that would work. But on day 3, I thought, I'm not sure if that's really what's going on here. And they had taught me some sign language. Thank you, Sephora. This is, do you want milk? She stops crying, bursts into a smile, and starts going, so cute. So I'm trying to interpret what she wants. And I ask him to bring milk and the baby's happy again. There's the evaluation. The baby's happy again. And I just think that we are always interpreting each other. Humans, we're having to interpret all day long with every person in all those situations. That jump to evaluation might be, no, she had milk half an hour ago. She doesn't need milk. I'm judging her crying to ask for more as wrong. And just wondering about, but I love this trying to interpret and keeping that in mind. The interpreter is interpreting language because we don't understand it. We don't really understand what's going on in the mediation room. And so we're trying to help interpret to us and to each party. And if we can keep that evaluation out of it, I think Chuck's point of the end point is not yet reached. And one of the places where I think some of us evaluate as we're mediating is this idea of agreement or not agreement. Or is this person the kind of person that's able to do this, maybe for mental health reasons or the niceness factor? This person's really grumpy. And so how do we, like Lindsay said, evaluation changes the conversation. It changes that where we are. So I'm wondering, and I hear often in debrief, well, there was going to be no agreement. So there was really, I just kind of ended the mediation. Or there was one other, you think they are going to reach agreement and the focus is on the agreement. And that's an evaluation too, in my mind. There may be 6 other things in the conversation that came out and we're not paying attention to because have this evaluation that agreement is good or not good. So that was just one of the things about evaluation that Sandra and I talked about raising in this context. So I'm going to let Sandra take over again.
Yeah. So the 2 things there that Kathy mentioned. So when the mediator starts to think, oh, they're not going to reach agreement, it makes that evaluation, and then the mediator is ready to be done, and maybe the parties aren't. Or when the mediator makes an evaluation that the parties are ready for agreement and maybe focuses solely on the agreement, and is missing the other pieces that are so important to talk about maybe before they can get to the agreement. I think another thing that came up was what happens if the mediator thinks that the agreement is not fair, and they're evaluating the agreement and they think, oh, this agreement is just not fair. So what are you as the mediator doing when you're evaluating those things? You find yourself with those evaluations in your head.
Well, throughout this whole workshop, I have been thinking, gosh, sometimes we have to make evaluations like what's going to help the parties, or, where do I think they are, or do I think it's helpful to continue the mediation? So I think we are going to, I do that. I think we all do that. So at some point.
Yeah, so definitely evaluations that we're making around the process. Patrick, I think you had your hand up.
So I know this whole class has been about focusing on the mediator and how we as mediators, go from observing to interpreting to assuming, to evaluating, whether it's, whether one of the clients reminds us of our daughter or granddaughter, or whether we've got both parties screaming and yelling at each other, and therefore, this is not being helpful at all. And again, that's my evaluation as a mediator. But one thought that just came to me as I think about this ladder going from observation to evaluation is, in fact, both parties come to us in mediation already in the evaluation stage. They have decided, who's right and who's wrong, who's good and who's bad. And we as mediators actually are trying to dial them backwards through that. From, okay, what assumptions have you reached to do that? How did you interpret that? Tell me exactly what observations did you make to have you arrive at that? Could there have been another assumption? Could there be something else that so, it's kind of, we might be going one way and we're trying to take them back the other way.
Great point, Pat. Yeah, we might be walking through the same thing we're trying to help walk them through. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Other thoughts? What about the cheerleading? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. The cheerleading is.
So what about the cheerleading piece and kind of that fine line of still saying impartial, and yet kind of helping to cheerlead? And so sometimes maybe you hear, oh, that was a great agreement that you came to. That was a fabulous agreement, and just kind of evaluating basically on the agreement when really what you're trying to do is cheerlead. So what do you think? How do you stay in that lane of the impartial mediator and at the same time cheerlead without evaluating?
I thank you, Sandra, for asking that question, because as I've been listening, I realize I have a lot of second guessing of myself in both directions. One, should I have held or encourage the parties to stay in the conversation longer? In other words, did I, even though they're both telling me we're done. Oftentimes the parties say that and they're not really done. And then, so the converse is not letting, when the parties truly are done, saying, realizing that and saying, okay, so, I'm often saying, I wanted to make sure that the mediation is owned by the parties. And in response to the question that you just asked, my approach is to congratulate them very quietly on their ability to reach agreement, because one of the things I've observed is that sometimes, even though the parties do reach agreement, one of the parties may not be actually in a state of mutual satisfaction. And so to comment on, the content, or, the content of the agreement, in my view, is not where I want to go. I only want to thank them for, working as diligently as they have to reach agreement. Good job. So.
Yeah. So focusing on the work that they've done.
I think a well-placed question could work here. Like, is this an agreement that you both can live with? Does this seem complete?
Yeah, that's how I've come to understand that not both parties are happy with it, because one person will say yes and the other person will go rah, 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 all right, So like, okay. Yeah.
I think in that situation you're describing, Victoria, my heart is racing with discomfort for that person who's not happy with the agreement, especially if you say something like, good job coming to an agreement. Like maybe they feel pressure to make an agreement that's not great for them, and they're telling you that. I don't know. In that moment, like even that evaluation makes me feel like don't pressure them to think that it's good to make an agreement. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's my reaction a little bit to what you said.
I think that's an excellent point, well taken, and it circles right back to, you know, one of the remarks I made is that regardless of whether the parties get an agreement or not, I find myself in that second guessing mode, whether, you know, did they really want to? Did I push them too hard? So, but I suppose with time that, maybe I'll become more comfortable with that.
So what kinds of, so it could go from the evaluation of the actual content of the agreement, because I've heard that in debrief sometimes, and some people notice it right away. Oops, I made a misstep in saying something specific, positive about the agreement that was received positively by both parties, but it was evaluative. Oh, that was a wonderful agreement you came to. As opposed to, so you have that far end of the spectrum to, I'm grateful I was able to be here and help participate in this conversation. I hope it was useful to you, or something that's more process focused. How do some of you end your mediations without crossing over into the evaluating of the actual work that's been done or the agreement? And I think this is just to highlight, Sandra and I would both suggest that saying, oh, you did a great agreement here is probably less neutral than we would encourage people to do. Is that right, Sandra?
Yes. Yes.
So,
Mike?
If you've had a mediation and the parties don't agree, but at the same time, they've shared a lot of information and given each other a chance to look, they've had a really good conversation. Don't we owe them as mediators as much thanks for what they did as if we reach what we perceive as a really good agreement?
I agree with Mike. I agree with Mike.
I don't think thanks is the right word. I think
Well,
you
that's
recognize their hard work. Yeah.
Yeah, I have often said, you guys worked really hard this afternoon. I say that pretty often, and believe it, feel it. And that's without regard to Mike's point. That's without regard to a resolution.
Rob, could you say what you said again? I didn't quite hear it, and I wanted to hear your voice.
I just said, I don't think thanks is quite the right word. I think you're recognizing their effort. You don't have to thank them for that, but you just recognize that it was probably difficult for them. When you thank them, then it's about you. And I think it needs to be about you. So
I like that distinction. Thank you. We have a couple more minutes left, but Martin, do you have anything? Because I so missed hearing your voice, even if you just say hello. But if you have one of your Martin nuggets, I would love to hear it.
It's been a long time, and I'm putting a toe in the water, and it's beautiful to see your faces and hear the voices and the old mediation talk. So thank you for this.
We're happy you're here, Martin.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
I would just add one final thing is there's a lot of times where maybe I haven't reached agreement, but the energy in the room has changed, at the end of the mediation. And I'm actually, when I'm able to do that, sometimes I'm not, when I'm able to do it, I'm really proud of just being able to change the energy, even if an agreement isn't reached. Where people have listened to each other, they've got clarity, a little bit clarity on the issues. They've been courageous in terms of being vulnerable a lot of times. And so I think that as mediators is something I try to remind myself that is also, it's not just about agreement. It's about the energy dynamics. So just throw that out there.
It reminds me of that difference between sometimes you'll have folks that will come to agreement, and they're coming to agreement because it feels like the lesser of two evils, and they're just not really happy with it. And yet this is using their self-determination. This is their best decision. And so they sign off on it. And maybe one of the, I've had a party just actually toss the pen because they were so unhappy, and yet this was their best decision. Versus I've had other cases where they did not come to agreement. And during that mediation, they understood each other. And one person can say, yeah, I get why you did that, or I get why you didn't do that. They shake hands and walk out of the room together, and yet they did not come to agreement. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, being mindful that it's 3:30, I had a story, but I think instead I'm going to share screen, if that's okay. Sandra, you can give some wrapping up words while I look for this, if that's okay.
How about if folks just kind of popcorn style, maybe say a word or two about kind of the discussion today. Something that was helpful. Just a word or two of something that was helpful today.
Reflective for me.
Reflective.
I took a lot of notes about new tools for my toolbox.
Neutral.
I can say that reflecting observation makes the mediation end happy.
Reflecting observations, okay?
Just how much I can always learn.
More learning.
There's always more than meets the eye.
More than meets the eye.
How easy it is to, in a long-term relationship, such as a 30-year marriage, to interpret observations just like that. So, and evaluate. So
oh, this could be a much longer discussion with.
Indeed.
Anyone else? Something that was helpful today?
I think it's helpful just to talk about this and to be more aware of what I'm thinking, what's going on with me.
Yeah, more awareness.
It's helpful for me for a reminder to cross-check, to check in with whoever I'm talking to.
Yeah, do those check-ins.
Yeah, a daily, lifelong practice.
We'll be practicing forever.
Well, no, what I mean is practicing not only when we're in mediator mode, but just with everyone and actually with oneself.
Right? Yeah.
Sahar.
I like to add to that reframing the observation has advantage both for the mediator and the parties. I understand.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, I'm tempted to still read the story, but I'm mindful of your time. So you can tell me after I share this. I'm going to try and share.
Can you all see that? What an interesting observation from each perspective, right? There's interpretations involved there. And if they're fighting over money, there's probably some evaluation too, or fighting over other things. And so I think just to me, again, the reason we thought this was important was to help remind ourselves how much we overlay observation with interpretation and sometimes with evaluation. And it's not that we're doing it wrong, but just to be mindful of that and to check in, as Sephora and others have said, to be transparent, to check out with the parties. What does this mean to you? Do I have the right or right enough interpretation to be useful in conducting this conversation? So I think I'm not going to share the story. I think that's good enough. I think Chuck sent me that one. Thanks, Chuck. So I'm just grateful to see you all and hope this was useful and very much enjoy these discussions, and the prep with Sandra is always a delight for me. Evaluation, but it's okay. It's my own internal. So.
Thank you all. And thank you
Thank
all
you.
for the rich discussion today.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for putting this together.
Yeah.